This week, a law came into effect in Missouri which bans the use of meat terminology to describe any food products that haven't come from a slaughtered animal. It means that vegan brands could face imprisonment or a fine of up to $1,000 if they use words like sausage or hot dog on their packaging or describe their products as plant-based meat. And of course, the animal industry lobbied to have this law passed, specifically the Missouri Cattlemen's Association, excuse me. And unsurprisingly, a lawsuit has been filed by Tofurky, Good Food Institute, the ACLU, and the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And they're basically saying that this is a violation of the First Amendment. Like similar moves to censor plant-based milk labels, this law has nothing to do with consumer protection. Indeed, the Missouri Consumer Protection Agency has no evidence that consumers are confused by the labels of plant-based products. No one buys Tofurky plant-based deli slices thinking they were carved from a slaughtered animal any more than people are buying almond milk thinking it was squeezed from a cow's udder. Our lawsuit documents that the law infringes on the First Amendment, preventing the clear and accurate labeling of plant-based and clean meat products and denying fair and honest competition in the marketplace. The lawsuit also documents how the Missouri law violates the Dormant Commerce Clause by discriminating against out-of-state companies to protect in-state meat producers, and infringes on the Due Process Clause because the vague language makes it difficult for companies to know what is and is not legal. And just to be clear, this is in effect. It's been in effect for the last few days. I think it went into effect August 28th. So it is now illegal to, again, use these sorts of words, meat, sausage, on any sort of plant-based product. And again, they are subject to a $1,000 fine and a year in prison. So obviously, this is stupid. This is just utterly ridiculous. It's shameful, not only just because of the law itself, but also the reasoning behind it, which is not to protect consumers in any way, shape, or form. It's to protect the industry. And any mention of consumers and consumer confusion is total bullshit, especially considering there is no evidence that people are confused by, plant-based meats and whatnot. This related study on plant milks by the Plant-Based Food Association showed that the majority of people want plant milks to be called the name of the plant followed by milk, so almond milk, cashew milk, etc. So people aren't confused by almond milk, but they are confused by veggie sausage or plant-based burger patties. Really? And you've got to love their focus on farm and ranch families. So this is from their press release, the Missouri Cattlemen's Association, their press release after the bill was passed. So not industry, of course. They would never use that word because they know how that sounds. You know, they know that it brings up images of massive farms, massive barns stuffed full of animals, right? It brings to mind essentially the reality of animal agriculture, at least the vast majority of it, right? It's not what they want people to think of when they think of their products. But family farms, on the other hand, that's like happy cows, right? It makes us think of green fields dotted with just a few cows, happily grazing. And of course, it's small farms run by families, people just trying to make a living. I mean, that's why their logo is this, right? Showing presumably a happy family and their happy cows, and not this. And as Katrina Fox points out for Forbes, it's also incredibly hypocritical. Can we just pause for a moment and acknowledge the irony of the animal agriculture industry calling for transparency in food labeling? For years, they've got away with depicting images of happy cows on packets of cheese or butter who are seemingly delighted to provide milk meant for their babies to humans. The reality is far more different. Female cows are forcibly inseminated, kept pregnant year after year, and often hooked up to milking machines that result in painful infections such as mastitis. The presentation and promotion of meat in the form of nuggets, drumsticks, or other euphemisms is aimed at distancing consumers from the abhorrent cruelty endemic in animal agriculture, reducing someone to something, a product. Regardless of how the cow, pig, or chicken was raised, whether they got to run around freely in green pastures, or were confined in a dull concrete prison aptly called a factory farm, they all end up at the slaughterhouse where they unwillingly die, kicking and screaming in terror and pain. Can we take a moment to appreciate that this is in Forbes? Now, Katrina Fox, she writes specifically about vegan and plant-based business, and I'm guessing that she is vegan, or certainly vegan-friendly, right? But, I mean, I'm just floored, honestly, to see something like this written in such a major publication, something like Forbes. I'm assuming someone edited that and went, yeah, that's cool, that's fine. I mean, It's just amazing. It's just amazing to think back to less than a decade ago, really just a few years ago, and how different not eating animals was viewed on the whole by the media. Times are changing. So she goes on to say that, for the first time, the animal agriculture industry feels threatened, right? Like this is why they're doing this, is because they feel threatened. And I think that's obvious to anyone, right? To anyone with eyeballs, that's obvious. And it's why I'm personally not concerned. I agree with Good Food Institute that this is ultimately going to be tossed out. This is going to be seen for what it is, and a ridiculous ploy by industry, not to protect consumers, but to protect themselves. And it's just ultimately anti-American. So as stupid as it is, as frustrating as it is, I ultimately feel really positive about it, because seeing stuff like this just shows how fucking scared they are, how scared these people are by the rise of plant-based foods and by the rise of people not wanting to eat their shitty, disgusting, cruel products. They know that plant-based and clean meat are getting better and better at competing on taste and texture, price, availability. Once these are equivalent, most people will choose these options. Most people don't want to eat cruel meat. They just feel like they have no other options right now. Again, this is all changing, and the Missouri Cattlemen's Association knows it. They can try to label Tofurkey as not meat. They can try to label soy milk as not milk. They can try to say that, clean meat is not actually meat. It's not going to last. Even if these things get put into place, they're not going to last. And yeah, these people are just on the wrong side of history. And I think they kind of know it. The final thing I'll say, because I have to be contrarian at least a little bit, and this is something I've talked about before, at least in terms of plant-based milk. I think there is an argument to be made. Maybe certain plant-based milks shouldn't be called milk. Please don't kill me. Again, I and others have made the argument. I don't think any other vegans have talked about this, and I understand why. It's a touchy thing. I get it. I think people do assume that milk has a certain nutrition profile, right? That it's at least in terms of like protein and calcium and probably vitamin D as well. So I think you can make the argument that a plant-based milk that, say, isn't fortified with calcium, which a few of them are not, the ones that are like only 3 ingredients, right? It's just almond and water and like maple syrup or something. And oh God, what was that one brand I tried? That was the worst thing ever. Yeah, so a milk like that isn't fortified with calcium, that doesn't have a certain amount of protein. So most of the non-dairy milks, right? Like now we're getting into kind of scary territory, because now you're looking at pretty much all the almond milk, all the coconut milk, pretty much everything that isn't soy or pea-based milk has like very little protein in it. And again, if it isn't fortified with vitamin D, I think there's an argument to be made that these things maybe should not be classified as milk. Similarly, there's an argument to be made that any plant-based product using meat terms, sausage, all that kind of stuff, should at least be fortified with B12. A lot of consumers view these milks as healthier. I'm not sure that calcium fortified sugar water, which is basically what almond milk is, I'm not sure that that's really healthier than like a low-fat milk that at least has protein in it. Obviously, it depends on what else they're eating. And then, of course, the bigger issue, the thing I'm really concerned about is when it comes to kids, right? And obviously, pediatricians and pediatric organizations, dietetic organizations are clear that, like, you do not feed any sort of milk, even cow's milk, 1 year and under, right? And then once they're past a year, you can start feeding them specifically like soy milk, right? Non-dairy milks that have a certain amount of fat and have a certain amount of protein. So none of the other stuff. But it's not clear whether or not that is actually reaching consumers. I mean, plant-based milks are still relatively new, and there really isn't much research on their consumption, like amongst children. There was that recent controversial study that I commented on in this video, but it was very limited considering it didn't distinguish between plant milks. Again, this is very important since most plant milks are totally inappropriate for children. Now, again, how many consumers are actually feeding their children, like really young children, non-dairy milks? I don't know. I'm sure it's on the rise because typically when we start changing our diets, our kids start eating what we're eating. So that's something that I'm just personally concerned about. The idea that people are feeding their little babies, again, calcium fortified sugar water, ooh, that really makes me cringe. So again, I think there's an argument to be made that there maybe should be a legal definition for milk, and that some of these plant-based milks maybe don't fit that definition, but I could be wrong. Maybe consumers are smarter than I think, and they're not going to be feeding their kids these milks, although again, we do have examples of some crazy vegans feeding their kids, well, you know, whatever, we all know those stories. So I don't know, I'd like to know your thoughts there. It's a tough thing because obviously we want people to be consuming less animal products, right? But I don't want to do that at the expense of people's health, right? And I don't want to do that if, you know, people feel good at first because placebo, but then they feel shit later on because they're just not getting enough, you know, calories, enough protein, something like that. And they don't realize because they went from having 2 glasses of 2% milk and getting like, I don't know, 300 calories a day to getting like 100 calories a day from the almond milk. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's not a good outcome to me. I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to hear what you guys think. So leave your comments and questions down below. Subscribe, that's cool. And support the channel, patreon.com/unnaturalvegan. And I'll have a new video very soon. I feel like I get more southern in the outro. Subscribe, support the channel, patreon.com/unnaturalvegan. Ooh. Plant-based milks are still... Oh my god. I have a combination of a baby running around and also like renovation stuff going on, and it's just not working for me right now. This is a very professional channel, if you couldn't tell.